Thanks for joining us today, Caren. This session is about how sociocultural norms, including gender, impact on the effective functioning of value chains. And so I was wondering, from your perspective as an economist, how do you see that playing out? How do those social and cultural norms, including gender, impact the effective functioning of market systems?
It's such an important question. Economists are not always accustomed to thinking about how social norms and culture and traditions influence market systems or outcomes. I teach a course at American University. In my former life, I taught this course on gender analysis and economics. And I start by reminding our students that gender is the social construction of roles, relationships, power dynamics, entitlements, responsibilities for males and females. And as such, the social construction of all of these things embeds our communities, embeds markets, embeds institutions. So that markets and institutions themselves carry gendered norms within them. And it might be gender norms about what types of work is appropriate for women or work is appropriate for men. It might be norms about who should manage money. It might be norms about what kinds of work women and men should do in the home, for instance, versus in the market. So we need to be thinking about all of these things. There's many examples in economics. You know, occupational segregation by sex is an economic fact of life in every culture around the world. There's a really great piece of research that I would like to recommend to everybody. That's the recent State of Food and Agriculture report produced by the FAO last year, which is on gender in agriculture. And this is a bit of a generalization because patterns vary by country, but for instance, in parts of Africa, males and females may be responsible for different types of crops. But it also may be that women provide labor to men on their crops. And so it's important to understand roles and responsibilities. How are these divisions of labor assigned? Who makes decisions about what to plant? Who makes decisions about the timing of that? Who makes decisions about how to market and use the proceeds of the agricultural products that are being produced? In other countries, in Asia, for instance, it may be that men and women work on the same crop, but they have different types of tasks. So for instance, women may be more responsible for weeding, and men may be more responsible for harvesting. So it's really important to do a really good diagnostic that probes into detail into all of these kinds of issues in order to understand the gender dynamics.
What are some practical ways that as donors and as practitioners we can firstly understand what's going on, and then secondly really apply that analysis into the implementation and the design of our projects? Building that into the design process.
So these are really important questions. Here at USAID, we actually have had requirements since 2009 that mandate a gender analysis be done for every country strategic plan and for all project designs. A good gender analysis is the systematic gathering of information about a lot of issues. So for instance, issues of resource use, access, control, entitlements, issues about cultural norms and perceptions of males and female roles, information about legal norms and laws and regulations and institutional constraints that shape male and female opportunities. And then finally, issues about the balance of power in different relationships, the informal balance of power and even a formal balance of power. For instance, do men use violence against women as a threat or as a way to coerce women into performing certain types of tasks or behaving in certain ways? It's a way of enforcing certain gender norms of behavior. So a gender analysis is really an important diagnostic to understand gender relations in a particular socioeconomic and political context. There are many tools that practitioners use to design a gender analysis, and those are particularly important. But probably what's more important is how do we use that analysis to design good programs and projects. So for instance, if we're designing a project that has an ultimate goal to increase the productivity of agriculture in a particular place, we need to ask a lot of questions, not just about female and male access to different types of inputs land, capital, seeds, extension services, new technologies. We need to understand the social norms surrounding those issues, the decision making about those issues, the constraints that prevent male and female smallholders from being able to access the same types of opportunities. Right. I think it's also important to be asking deliberately, what can we do with this information? How can we use it to design our programs to really do three things? One, to ensure that we're reducing the gender gap that is holding us back. What's the gender gap that may not make this program as successful as it could be? Second of all, how are we looking for opportunities to enhance and to leverage women's participation in project design, execution, monitoring and evaluation, involvement in a genuine sense, and as leaders? I think it's really important that we be thinking explicitly about how we leverage women's unique expertise and talents in leadership positions. And finally, I think it's important to be asking, does the project design, does the program design meet the needs of both males and females? And if it doesn't, how can we do that? So it means talking to males, it means talking to females, and it means really being responsive in program design to the needs that both have expressed.
Can you tell us a little bit about USAID's policy on gender and female empowerment, especially as that relates to value chain programs?
One of the things that I've been doing since I've joined USAID last year is co-leading an internal process to update what has been a 30-year-old Women in Development policy. We expect to launch in early March a new policy on gender equality and female empowerment. This policy is very exciting for us as an agency. Our primary approach to gender equality and female empowerment is through integration of gender equality and female empowerment results and objectives explicitly throughout our program cycle. So for instance, in country strategic planning, in project design, in implementation, monitoring and evaluation. To do this, we have to become much better as an agency in learning. So we do place a premium on understanding what works, what doesn't work. Impact evaluation will be really important to help us all become better at what we do and to be able to make the evidence case for investing in female empowerment and gender and reducing gender gaps as the way we should be doing business.
Could you maybe give us some examples of where you've seen value chain development actually have a positive impact on challenging and even changing some of those sociocultural norms?
It's a really good question to ask, and I think this is a really important question for our learning agenda going forward. I would actually suggest that we might think about designing some really good impact evaluation for how value chains can be used to change social norms and behavior. That said, we know that economic interventions are really important for changing social norms. Take a country like Bangladesh. 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, Bangladesh was one of the countries that had a very early age of marriage. But beginning in about 1991, Bangladesh opened itself to foreign trade. And we all know the story of the garment industry in Bangladesh, where there were 4 factories initially that were operating to a point 20 years later where we have thousands of garment factories. The garment factories have primarily used female labor drawn from Bangladesh's countryside or from the cities. And women have, as a result, gained employment, gained income. And demographers who have looked at this have actually found that as women have been drawn into this paid labor force, the age of marriage has actually increased by about 4 or 5 years. So formerly the age of marriage was 13, 14, now it's about 18 to 20. Why is this important? It's actually really important for a number of reasons. Early marriage leads to early childbearing. Early childbearing has all kinds of attendant health risks for young women and for their newborn babies. Early child marriage has been associated with decreased options and opportunities for girls. There's often an age gap between the age of the girl and the man that she marries, and she may not be very empowered in that type of relationship. Older age at marriage actually gives women greater bargaining power. It delays childbearing, it therefore reduces fertility. So that's a really interesting example of a social norm that in the course of a generation, as a result of an economic intervention, has really changed. to the benefit not just of women, but men. And of course, the garment industry has been associated with part of the economic growth that Bangladesh has experienced over the last 20 years.
So perhaps examples like this one would support the argument that some people would make that economic empowerment itself is the best way to change socio-cultural norms, including gender inequality, and that we actually don't need any specific efforts to target women. What would your response be to that?
The most recent literature argues that economic growth has a role to play, but itself is not sufficient in reducing all of the important gender gaps that make development outcomes less likely to be realized. And that there may be an important role to play for government action or for specific NGO or other types of institutional changes. So for instance, economic growth is not necessarily going to bring about changes in inheritance laws, for instance, that prohibit women from inheriting property. It may not bring about changes in credit laws that prohibit women from being able to borrow on their own without a male signature. It may not bring about reductions in gender-based violence that we know has costs not only for women themselves, but for communities as a whole. So we probably need a range of complementary and concerted efforts, both legal change, institutional interventions, norms change, I think, to really see the kind of progress that we need in gender equality and female empowerment. It's not to say that we don't promote economic growth. We do. We also have to be sensitive to the type of economic growth that we're promoting. The type of economic growth that is inclusive, that draws women in on an equal and level playing field, that does not draw women in on inferior terms and conditions, for instance, relies on them as simply low skill or low wage labor, but really creates opportunities for women to develop skills and capacities to be able to benefit in turn from a growth that is empowering for many people. Unfortunately, we've had a growth model that has not always been as inclusive as it needs to be or could be, and we really need to be thinking then much more critically, not just about the rate of economic growth, but the type of economic growth that we're trying to develop.
So to wrap up, can you give us some words of wisdom for those of us who are trying to grapple with understanding and applying this knowledge of sociocultural norms to our value chain development programs?
The first message I would say is that we pay attention to and systematically and deliberately strive to achieve gender equality and female empowerment, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the smart thing to do. It's because it's going to make our overall development objectives better. Second of all, it's not rocket science to do this. There are many tools and resources that are out there that we can all use. I think what's really required is a mindset change and kind of a paradigm change. It requires us to make visible questions that perhaps we take for granted, or things that we don't always think about in a very explicit way. Asking questions that we don't normally ask, or talking to people, women for instance, that we may not always talk to when we're doing project designs or we're thinking about social change more broadly. So I think it's not rocket science, and I think there's a lot out there that we could all do, we could all use together to collectively and collaboratively engage in this effort going forward. And the third thing I would say is that this is a process. Change isn't going to happen overnight, and we shouldn't expect it to happen overnight. But I would ask all of you to think about where are the pivot points that we can identify to get us on the process that will get us there in the long term.